Hey, welcome back to another part of creating a full stack CRUD crap app from scratch. This is another tutorial where in the last video I promised we would get to some styling. And I was doing it on the side, and unlike a lot of my videos, I will typically work off of bullet points rather than full on scripts, as I just can't operate that way. But when it came to styling, I did have to do a lot off camera and make some notes, several notes about what my choices were or why they were. I made them the way they were, and I'll get to that here momentarily. But I'm gonna kind of shift gears. I'm actually gonna try and teach y'all some cool React stuff you can do, and some just general problems that come into React and CSS cascading when dealing with class names. I'll get to that in a moment, and some of the solutions that I've found over years, months, days, whatever, over time, right? There you go. Solutions I found over time to get around the problems you're going to run into here. For example, if you wanted to build your own component library for reusable bits and pieces across your app, that seems very sensible instead of just copying and pasting. Like, I could go to my login page, style the input to look nice with a bunch of class names, and then just copy and paste that set of class names to every other input on my project. But again, that could be a very long set of class names, and if those class names, for example, have to change because I want to change a style on one input, or I want to change a style globally across my application, that could present a lot of problems where I'd have to go to every single input across every single component or view or whatever and alter that set of class names. So your first inclination is like, let me build my own input component and move on from there. But that also presents another set of problems in terms of how do you pass refs to inputs, because refs cannot be passed down as props. For example, it's a React. It's one of the common React hooks you can use, the useRef hook, right? And a ref is another way of wiring up our inputs. We've done so far. Oh, I just logged in. We've always done in this tutorial state-controlled inputs, right? So we haven't talked about uncontrolled inputs where you could use refs to simply let the user type into the DOM and then ask the ref to pull the value out of the DOM and into the React tree for you. That's basically the idea behind it. They can be very useful when dealing with inputs, but you can't pass them down as props, so you have to know a function called forward ref. We're going to get into that possibly here. But yeah, I figured we'd build out some components and show some libraries and other techniques that you can use to begin building out the styles of your app. Now, right before I get to the code, it's been, 3 minutes of housekeeping so far. Some of my alumni and students in my Discord have actually shown me some styling they've already applied themselves, meaning they've already gone to the lengths of using this app for a D&D game. They have already showed me some screenshots of what they decided to style with instead. And I encourage y'all, get in the comments. I will read the YouTube comments, and maybe I'll even make like a showcase video near the end or middle of this series to show some of the cool stuff that y'all build. So make sure you get some screenshots or even deployed links, even temporarily deployed links, so you can show off what you've been learning through this tutorial. Basically this has become almost like a full-on free course on YouTube I'm making. Let's just continue it to glory. Let's just go. Let's just build out a full awesome application, which is my goal in the first place. Yeah, so make sure to leave some comments down below, get involved in our Discord community, and come paste some screenshots of what you're building if you decide to go with different styling options than me or myself and I. So yeah, I know we left off with a successful drawer, buttons, and things like that going on here and converting everything over. I am fairly zoomed in, so obviously when you're working, it might not look as big on your browser. It's because, again, I'm super zoomed in, which I'll have to remember that as I zoom in and out of these views here, because that's going to be very confusing to work with breakpoints and endpoints if I constantly break it this way. But we're going to get there, right? Righto. So one of the things that I took note of that I forgot to talk about was this little issue right here, because I forgot the prop name in React Router DOM v6 for navlink, where both notes /new and /notes share the same base path name, which means these two right here are going to have an issue whenever I click on the add note link, because technically that is also a match to the notes path. We can fix that by going to our nav link here in the side drawer, and on notes we have a prop we could pass it called end, which is a Boolean prop. Again, in some projects, some individuals will prefer to leave values props like this, prop values that are Boolean, aka do they exist true or do they exist false. They like to leave their props just as a singular word, and sometimes that pattern is okay depending on your project and who you're like. If you're collaborating with multiple people, I would probably advise actually doing a Boolean style value like that rather than leaving it as a single prop name, as that can be confusing where they exist somewhere and not elsewhere. Again, like I've mentioned before, TypeScript is a spectrum, and even though sometimes I might misnomer something or like misspeak on a TypeScript property or something like that, the general idea is, again, like, you don't have to be, you can go anywhere from incredibly strict, everything written out specifically, no any's, no BS, nothing, no goofiness, all the way to I want to have my array maps autocomplete, and that's really all I want to use it for. So again, this is an idea. Keep that in mind when you have props that are Boolean values. On bigger scale projects, on multi-collaborative projects, I would highly advise not using single word props like this. But since I'm running solo here, y'all, we're gonna rock. We're gonna go rock and roll. We're gonna go full guns blazing and just leave it as the end prop like that. But that prop right there, make sure that it has to be the correct ending path match for it to do that. So we can see now that just that one little trick there lets us go back to having what we want to have, which is if I go to add note view, it shows it right here, as you can see, and it doesn't also highlight the notes route in our side drawer right there. So yeah, I mean, how's it look on mobile? I mean, it looks decent. Yeah, that's good. That's awesome on mobile. Okay. You're going to see me doing this a lot during this process because we want to make sure that our stuff looks half decent, right? So one of the big problems and issues I have with having this ultra-wide 2560 length browser, or not browser, desktop, is things tend to get very stretched out on a massive size monitor in width like this. So a lot of times you have to do something called containerizing everything. Now, containers in deployment have something else entirely, but you'll see this term a lot in Bootstrap, and well, basically a lot of CSS kits or frameworks will have like, hey, at a certain screen size, rather than let all of my content just stretch the entire width of the window, which will be really not great looking on ultra wide monitors, let's just shove it into a container that centers it in the page, no matter how big the rest of the sides get. So that's a very common approach and technique you'll see in a lot of these projects. So we can make our own real quick here. This one, like I said, I had to take a lot of notes on this one, so you'll see my eyes darting to my side monitor to make sure I am talking about this correctly. And it'll give me a good chance to start talking about about what we're missing here. About like where you'll see me start to apply the fixes to certain problems we're going to be running into here. So yeah, so it makes sense that we would want some kind of top level component that will act as our container. And again, this could be as simple as adding a few class names to a div somewhere and calling it a day, which we can actually do real quick. So I'm going to collapse and close my open. If my server's open, it's not. Okay, we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and pop into one of my views. In one of our views here, like our home view, let's go ahead and start testing what I mean here, because I do thankfully have a crap ton of divs just kind of existing everywhere, which I love. Okay, so as of right now, if I had content that stretched the width of the screen, it would just do that, and it wouldn't look super nice. Can I exemplify that somehow? Maybe if I put like a paragraph tag that has like 15 lorem ipsum text base right there. Yeah, see, that's not going to look great if it was like a bunch of legit content. And again, if you're wondering what I just did there, I'm fairly certain I probably have repeated myself a couple times through these video series, but forgive me, filming across a couple weeks, 15, 20, 25 parts of this video series. Sometimes I forget what I have and haven't talked about. I'm sure it'll develop into a meme, and I'll see me getting roasted in the YouTube comments for going repetitive Andy. But, I typed in lorem, L-O-R-E-M, which is lorem ipsum, this Latin flavor text. We've talked about it because I've done the DnD ipsum, right? And I typed in times 15 to generate a crap ton of lorem ipsum text. This is through VS Code that helped me prove my point of this doesn't look so hot the bigger the monitor gets, right? So we're going to containerize this somehow. We can do that by adding some class names on the div that wraps the entire page here. So in Tailwind in particular, and in I think, is it Daisy or is it Tailwind that's container? I'm pretty sure it's just Tailwind, which I should probably have that open as well. Tailwind CSS. And you saw a class, a library pop up there just a moment ago that also, yeah, here we go. So component fixing elements width to the current breakpoint, right? So a class sets the max width of an element to match the min width of the current breakpoint. This is useful if you're for design for a fixed set of screen size instead of trying to accommodate a fully fluid viewport, right? So I'm not going to try and accommodate a fully fluid viewport. I want it just to containerize in the middle. When it gets like any bigger than like a 1920 monitor, say forget it, just put it all in the center, otherwise I don't care. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and add the container class name to this particular little div right here. There we go. Let's see what that does by itself. Okay, nothing. Awesome. That's what I like to see right there. I don't think I specified any kind of breakpoints, which might be an issue on that. So we'll do, let's see, some pixeling, MX auto, not pixeling, padding. Why did I say pixel? Because I saw PX. Some padding in the X direction and some auto margin in the X direction. And we're going to remove that padding on medium-sized breakpoints there. So that's how you can use Tailwind class names to remove padding when it gets to a small viewport, because maybe there'll be too much padding on like a tablet and phone viewport. And you want that additional padding on the container itself when it comes to... That's interesting that it's not doing anything at all. All the stuff is nested in there, right? I guess it's because I don't have any logic. Well, I should. That should exist there. That's interesting that that didn't pop off the way I thought it was going to pop off. Let's see. I got the project running, which is always a nice test to have here. I don't have any kind of errors. I do see the... There's that. Well, there's the full drawer, which might be where I have to apply it to for it to do what I think it needs to do. Drawer content. Div. No, okay. Why is it adding it to that ultra? Why is it adding it here? But when I get to that ultra wide size, it's not adding it. Because there it is. Like, there's the container in action, right? Where it is centering the content in the screen there, but at that certain breakpoint, that ultra large breakpoint, it's just like, nah, I ain't gonna do that. So hold on real quick here. Hold on. Okay, quick little jump edit right there. I warned y'all about it at the beginning of this video, and I did it anyway, where I said that, hey, I'll have to remember to zoom in and out to make sure these breakpoints are behaving the way I think they do. So I love that I was like, oh yeah, a container will centerize, it will just kind of contain things into a certain box size in the screen so the whole widescreen doesn't get ruined. And I was zoomed in to 200%, wondering why my screen size wasn't being read correctly. So this is where we ended before my little jump cut right there. Let me zoom out to normal levels. And as you can see, it does indeed containerize the content into the middle kind of portion of the screen. Again, it's not centered by default, according to their own documentation. You have to provide MX Auto to center a container, so it contains it to a certain size width, the max width. It sets a max width, and MX Auto makes sure that it gets centered to the screen here. And yeah, like I said at the beginning of the video, I need to remember to zoom out to normal levels to make sure my breakpoints are applying correctly here. I discovered that like 5 minutes after I did the edit right there, and I feel like an idiot. But hey, that's what it is, right? So it shouldn't have any effect on a mobile screen size right here. Yeah, I can't really zoom in on a mobile screen size for y'all, but, you know, again, the idea here is there's not a lot of real estate on mobile screen sizes, so I'm not going to be adding some ludicrous amount of padding in the X direction. So let's see what it looks like if I remove that MDPX0, because I like having padding on a large screen size, but right here, it would look a little bit overkill to have that additional padding added to it, right? Yeah, so again, that's the idea here. We're like on, or like maybe I won't show it on there. Maybe I'll show it like on tablets, maybe? I don't know what device we're going to try and showcase this on. Yeah, so like maybe I don't want that padding there, so if I add it back here to anything medium or smaller, right? Remove that padding, you can see it kind of spaced it back out right there. And again, this is why I didn't want to style live too much on this video series, because it'll be a lot of me testing back and forth, which is not a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, hopefully if anyone's zooming into 200% screen size here, that's what's gonna look like anyway. Okay, so like I said, container, nice and handy to have. And again, it would make sense that I would need to include this across all of my views, right? I'd have to go and add it to all of these views for them to all be containerized properly, or we can wrap our routes around them or something like that. I want to show y'all a couple different solutions. And again, like I'll tell y'all pros and cons about the solutions we come up with here. Of the solutions we come up with here, and I want to... I'll give y'all why I might choose one over the other, depending on the size and scale of the project or the needs of the project in general. So let's go to the components folder, and we're going to build out another component. We're going to call it the container. We'll make our own container, TSX. Did I have a template anywhere handy after all this copying and pasting? Did I actually take care of myself in the past? I did. Let's go ahead and do this. Container. There we go. And we'll call this the container component. Surprise, surprise. Now, I will be using props.children for this particular component, because whatever my container is going to be wrapping, it's going to be this div being replaced across a lot of my views, which I could do so individually, or I could choose to do so at a higher level. For example, outside over in my routes is something I could choose to do. But yeah, for now we're gonna try and move this to its own component, replace this one, and then start replacing the rest as we go. But there you go. That's this is what we're gonna be doing here. And again, because it's going to be sandwiching a whole bunch of other JSX elements and React stuff and HTML stuff, HTML stuff, it's going to have to render all of its children. So we're going to have to make sure that is one of our listed and required props, because it's going to be there. And what have I called these in the past? I think I did React node is what I've done. Okay, so we'll go with that. React node, just to be consistent here. I need to brush up on these TypeScript types to make sure that they all follow what I've learned over the years writing TSX code. But there's our props.children. We're cool, so we're going to be destructuring that off of the props.object, object, so then we can simply have the following. Render our children, if you would, right here. And let's grab the class names that we simply see right here. I'm going to cut them out and paste them onto this div yonder. There we go. Now, you might be wondering, Luke, what if you want to pass additional class names to this div containing div, maybe some other props as well, right? So whatever other props you have, like what if I want to add a data dash something? Like what if I wanted to add a data attribute? What if I pass it other props or something like that I wanted to add to the list here? So like if I wanted to add an ID selector or a data dash attribute or something else I can add to divs here. You can always do the following, where you can say, spread out the rest of the props, which at the moment, I don't think it's going to know what any of them are, because I haven't said that there are other props other than children. Okay? But that hopefully shouldn't matter, because I should be able to just come down yonder and write the following, rest, and hopefully TS isn't too angry at me, right? So what this does, it says take whatever other props that this component has been passed and spread them out in attribute dash and equal sign value pairs. Meaning, if I render this component somewhere as the following, if I render it as container like that, then it's just going to simply render this right here. If I render this container with an ID equals special like that, if I render it like that, then ID becomes a prop with a value, string value of special. So it'll basically take the rest of the props, because right now .rest represents everything else I have that I haven't specifically named yet or haven't destructured. So children, aka whatever this is, wrapping like that, for example, container. That right there is props.children, which we have destructured. And then .rest would represent whatever the rest of the props that I haven't specifically referenced or destructured yet. So basically, it would take that, and in place of rest, it would apply ID equals special when I render it in this fashion. Now, that's also cool to know, because then you could do something like that. And again, .rest now we'll take the rest of these props and spread them out for us onto that div, which is a very, very cool technique to know how to do when you want to destructure one or two or several things in particular, but you also don't want to have to write everything else by hand. This allows you to dynamically add and remove props from components in a very cool fashion. Yeah, that's something that's very interesting to know how to do, and hopefully it makes sense to y'all. We can do .rest right there. Now, you might be wondering, Lucarino, there's also going to be instances where we totally want to add, what if I did the following? What if I wanted to do that? I wanted to render this container, but I wanted to add a ton more padding in the X direction for some special use case. What do I do with this? Because technically now it would do the following. It would take these three props and spread them as ... rest, and we can't have two class names on the same component. So what we have to do in this case is actually provide a prop for class name, which will be some string value, and it's optional because we may not always have it on there, right? Because it will define its own class name down yonder, and I don't have to provide one here if I don't want to. So we're going to make an optional prop for this component. Now, with this class name, what will it do, right? Here's what we have to. Here's the first thing, Areno, you would probably take into consideration when it comes to doing some dynamic class naming stuff here. So let's get fancy. I'm going to nuke what my class names are here currently. Like I said, I want to turn this more into a teaching lesson of some cool React concepts that you can roll forward into other projects, and not just a 40-minute video where I talk about each class name I'm adding and why, and then y'all just blindly following along with it. So I encourage y'all to deviate and have fun with it, but I'm trying to give y'all some lessons along the way, including the styling, and not just, again, going add a flex here, add a padding here, add a margin here. That's not fun for anybody. So that's why I kind of took a break in this series to kind of think out how I wanted to approach this next part. So here's what you could do is you can interpolate, add those strings back in. Those are your base class names no matter what, and then you can just do a ternary or a short circuit. You could be like, hey, I'm destructured it yet, so we got to make sure we do that. There we go. If props.className is a string and truthy value, use it. Otherwise, just assign an empty string here to make sure that it's not broken in that regard. So you can see that right there, props.className. Use a string if it's there, otherwise default to an empty string, which will add nothing to this class name. So we're basically directly interpolating any other class names they might have here. Like, if we added those class names, what it should theoretically do, this is a truthy string value for props.className, which means it would take that and it would simply apply those class names when it comes time to render. But you can see with my tailwind or my headwind VS Code extension that it's telling me that's going to be an issue. And here is where a very big and annoying issue arises when using Tailwind in component-based UI renderers like React, Angular, Vue, and things like that. You may already be familiar with this situation. I know because I ran into it myself years ago when I really got into Tailwind and building out React Tailwind projects, and I realized something wasn't working the way I thought it was. So I honestly thought this right here was super hot stuff, and it's 23 minutes, hot shit that made me, feel super cool, but I realized it came with its pitfalls as well. So this is great for like entry-level React devs to know how to handle, right? Because this looks really cool, but there's the pitfall. Which padding would it use? PX2 or PX10? I wonder if I could just demonstrate this by forcing it, like doing this basically in my home component so we can actually see together what it ends up doing. Let's go check that out. Because technically, as of right now, it should be enough to render it as is and have it happily render as a container component elsewhere. So what we're going to do is go add it to our index exporter here. Container as container, blah, blah, blah. There we go. Cool. Now that that's exported out, let's head to our home page, and we're going to replace this div here with a container component. Let's just collapse that, paste it, open, close it. There we go. So we have now created our own first component in our component library for this or our other projects. If we just copy and paste it to it, import it from the components directory, we're good to go. The render, when I'm not zoomed in 200%, should indeed containerize all this information here in the center. Nothing has changed, so that's good here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it ended up rendering. Let's go to our Where is it? No, that's the side drawer, door content. Here we go. Yeah, so there is our lovely container. px2, mxauto, mdpx0. Those are like our baseline default class names that I'm kind of down with. Now, let's see what happens if I begin testing this like I did before. Like I had id equals, what was my, the example doesn't matter. I want to be consistent. Special. Right? Now it's saying that ID is not assignable to that type because it doesn't know that it's a prop on there. So right here, it doesn't matter what ... rest represents. But we are going to come up here and say, what if ID is a possible prop they're going to be adding onto it here? So that's how we're going to begin adding our ... rest to our types. To say, hey, it's optional and it's going to be a string value when it happens. So React should be happy once again. If I go back to the home component, it is indeed happy that I added the ID property there. Hard refresh. Let's take a look here. Hopefully I can get a bit faster at finding these elements here. So yeah, check it out. ID special is now correctly added on to our list of HTML attributes that we have passed to this div, right? And we can also see this little empty space right here is that empty ternary space I think I have from the class names from, yeah, that empty space is that little space right there I've highlighted between my interpolated class name string and the end of the actual class name string. But there you go. That's something cool to know how to do. Now. We, like I said, we have other properties we can add here. Like I would have to look up how to do the data attributes in TypeScript. I don't do that all that often. So I actually don't remember if I wrote down how you would handle that kind of an attribute compared to the rest, right? We could also just tell it to omit input like HTML attributes on elements here, so I don't have to worry about typing out every single one and what they are. We could take that into consideration. But yeah, okay, so the more important part here is I'll have to double check on how to TypeScript the non-written ones there, or we can just tell it to ignore them if they're there, right? Okay, so with that in mind, the more important part here that I'm trying to get at is if I pass these two to my component, what is it going to do when interpolating those class names here? Now, bgred is a terrible idea, but we're going to take a look at it anyway. Let's go ahead and see what this does for us. We're like, okay, I want to pass these custom class names to my container div. I want to see how they end up rendering. Again, I know it looks terrible. Just bear with me. Right, so clearly it rendered the background red part and it added padding x10, but clearly it is being ignored for padding x2 because the padding in the right here would be much larger had it actually listened to what I told it to, right? So that's interesting. Maybe like the value isn't that big or something like that. We can make it larger if we wanted to. I think is 24 one of the sizes it should be for Tailwind. Padding. What's like a crazy value we can have here? I don't know how big they go. I mean, they should go into a fairly large size. I want to make sure that 25 is one of them. 24, 28, 32. Okay. Yeah, 24. 24 is the one I was looking for, right? Or it doesn't matter. Okay, so yeah, it's clearly not taking the padding 24 serious. It's not like considering it over my padding x2. So again, this is an issue when you're dealing with things like component-based rendering using React or Vue, Angular, something like that. This is a situation that arises due to how CSS cascading works, right? The styles that we are trying to pass down to our div from the level of the component are being ignored because the order of the class name string doesn't matter at all, right? So the only way to apply our padding x24, because this parent render is trying to pass it down to like a div JSX element, and it's only paying attention to the px-2. So what we actually have to do is remove the px-2 in order for it to understand we want to use the px-24. There is a handy-dandy library that I've been using for a bit now to handle this issue, and this is only an issue when you're doing something like this, when you're passing additional class names down to a component to render and it already has conflicting class names. The more specific ones are these compared to this. This is the more like, if you're thinking of like CSS cascading specificity, it's not going to take this higher level one, it'll take the more specific one, which is this here. That's kind of like a quick rundown of why that works the way it does. It's basically an algorithm it follows to determine which class names to use first or understand and use, right? Technically, this is the more specific one. This is the more generic one, if you want to think about it that way in class specificity. So that's why it works that way. So there's a library that actually helps you handle this issue here. I'm going to laugh if this doesn't work the way I think it does, or it should, because I was testing it off camera out of sheer curiosity. Is a handy dandy library called tailwind-merge. That's sole purpose. It's small. It's fully typed, which is awesome, and it is supports Tailwind 3 and up. I'm fairly certain, which I'm really hoping that's what we're on here, because it's been a hot minute since I installed and ran all this stuff. Okay, yeah, we're on 3 and higher, so it should be good to go. Yeah. And it has different versions of Tailwind merge that you could bring in, right? To use how you see fit. And there's a whole lot of other cool stuff that it can do here. Right? So let's go ahead and bring in our lovely new library we're going to be using here. We're going to say import. I'm pretty sure it's a named import from tailwind-merge. We're going to find out very quickly if it's not the way I think it is. Yeah, so tailwind-merge is a function that will take all of your class names and it will simply help override them should they need to and merge them in a safe way for Tailwind where things won't get broken. So it'll override conflicting classes and keeps everything else untouched. So in the case that we have here, it should take px24 and override the conflicting class of px2 to avoid those CSS cascading rules. Remember, this is only an issue, not just with Tailwind, but React and Vue when you're running with CSS class names and rendering in a component-based framework, right? So because of the cascading algorithm, it will use the more specific conflicting class name first, which is not the feature that we're looking for here. So what we could take is take this list of class names and simply pass it through a call to twmerge and say, oh crap, I forgot to copy the original class names. Yoink. And cut those. Call tailwind-merge. Pass in our first list of class names that we want to be the baseline. And then afterwards, we can pass in the class names from props, and it should be able to merge them successfully here and not interfere with overriding class names. So, classic Luke, forget to restart the project. I love it. Don't know what the high security vulnerability is. It might be in tailwind-merge. We can audit it at a later time. That's not going to be a fun part to do in this video, so I don't care that much about it. Hey, okay, so there is a ton more padding there. I mean, again, it's a screen size thing, so there is a ton more padding when it's there. And as you probably saw before I started moving things around to see if it actually did anything, is take a look at our list of class names right here. We have px2 has been indeed removed, and padding x24 has been placed in its stead. So it has actually successfully worked. We can see a lot more padding on the bigger screen size here. So yeah, that's what tailwind-merge does. And when we're building out our components, we're probably going to be doing a class name call with tailwind-merge like this pretty much everywhere across our application, because that's what you need it to do, right? So it lets any conflicting class win. So if this is the base class and we pass in a new one that's conflicting, it'll let that one win. That's the basic functionality of tailwind-merge. And again, I will only use this if I'm actually building out a bunch of components as a quote-unquote like component library that I'll be using across my application. And in particular, if I'm going to be choosing to be able to write custom additional class names. Now, if you're sitting here and thinking, I'm never going to pass this thing another class name, dude, then this is totally overkill and probably not worth your time. But again, I'm trying to make this into a fun lesson for y'all and not just a follow along with my CSS. So yeah. It resolves non-trivial conflicts. It supports modifiers and stacked modifiers when it comes to things like padding 2 and hover or something like that. So if you have P2 and hover, P2, P4, something like that, it can handle how to appropriately merge those together and not have them conflict. It'll support arbitrary values as well, meaning if you have like CSS color variables that are things like this, if you had some CSS variable, it knows how to handle those, which I think is pretty cool. That's way beyond the scope of this particular thing. You can even do weirdo variants by writing your own selectors in the middle of a TW merge. So like you could call merge like that and pass it some goofy selectors or something like that. Like you could do custom selectors with custom values and things like that, and it knows how to handle variants and things like that, which I think is pretty cool. It does support the important modifier, the good old exclamation point, just to make sure if we're wondering why it won't do anything. It'll preserve non-tailwind classes, so it doesn't just purge out class names that you've written yourself if you had to write some custom ones. It'll ignore falsy values, which is really cool. And it also supports arrays and nested arrays. So that's something that's actually I've found to be really cool about it, where you can have like P2, M5, whatever, and then you want to pass in an array of class names. It knows how to handle that, and it can also handle an array of class names, right? So it knows how to handle a whole bunch of different types here, which makes it a really nifty little library for messing with a very Tailwind in particular, because that's what it's meant for, with this problem of cascading style algorithms messing with your conflicting class names. So that was a lot to talk about for such a small little thing here, but again, it could be such a massive feature in your projects and makes you, and again, you now know a fundamental problem of cascading style algorithms when it comes to component-based UIs, right? So remember, that's going to be, I mean, I doubt you're going to get asked that in an interview, but it does give you another tool in your tool belt to solve a problem when you recognize it, going, oh, hold on, you're passing class names to this component render that are going to be conflicting class names down here in this component, the element itself. You'll now know you'll have to figure out a different way to get around that, or write some logic yourself to remove conflicting class names should they be passed in. So yeah, that's just a fun little tidbit right there I wanted to throw y'all's way. Just to make sure you understood what I meant by ... rest, how we can handle that. I'm never going to be passing this and taking an ID, so I'm going to get rid of it. But we'll leave class name there because you never know. And that's what it's going to look like. That's what a lot of our components that we're going to be building will now look like. Tailwind-merge with our base level of class names, and then anything else we want to pass it for customization. And we're actually going to talk about something else we can do with that, because there's a lot of cool things you could do with how you pass class names to these components. Tailwind-merge is just that handy one to solve that one problem. If I wanted to pass in something other than string values, like what if I wanted to pass in arrays or objects with properties and values, especially when it comes to styling, being able to pass like -info, -success, -error, those Daisy UI and Bootstrap inspired values. Hold on. Where's a button real quick? Button, right? Like we know that they support the classic Bootstrap style class names like primary, secondary, accent, info, success, warning. Being able to set up what those constants are and being able to pass class names as objects that take the variants as their values and apply them correctly. There's another library that can help us do that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But for now, class name and home looks pretty good right now. I'm happy with that, and we're going to move on to maybe actually building out some inputs or something like that here, because at the moment, it looks fine, I suppose. This isn't not that big of a deal. We're going to move over to like our login component, and maybe we're going to start building out some of our form to look a little bit nicer here and talk about some other things along the way. So in just a second, we'll get to that. Timeout, fake out on the styling the inputs in the login. Again, I'm making lessons here, and then the styling will be optional because I want y'all to try, experiment, and have some fun on your own. You have to follow me exactly. Again, I'll have a video where it'll probably be boring, and I'll probably condense it, and it'll be me smashing out all this base styling for all my elements here. But in the vein of learning cool component tricks you can do and building your own little component library for a or many projects, we talked about some cool tricks we could do here with ... rest and whatnot, but there's one step further. I want to show y'all something that you can do when it comes to this thing here. So remember, we had those values, and I mentioned I needed to look into how to add something like this, where I wanted to be able to pass in custom attributes that might be HTML-based attributes to my component. So as of right now, ID equals special. This prop to the container component does not have a prop that we're going to be destructuring and technically using on this component here, right? So even though TypeScript is mad at me, it will render correctly. So if I render the browser, hopefully it's not a massive error. Yeah, we're fine. Let's go find it. Yeah, you can see it added the HTML attributes for me correctly. So that's always a great starting point where your TS is giving you an error or warning, but if it happens to render in runtime just fine, then you can go slap an any and call it a day. I wouldn't blame you. But there's actually a better way to handle this solution and problem right here. So a better way to handle this problem with a solution right here. It is not recognizing that ID is a prop that I'm adding to my container, which again, you could choose to do it that way. But this is, TypeScript-wise, is this a custom prop called ID, or is this meant to be an ID HTML attribute? We don't really know. And again, what if you're adding a whole bunch of other HTML attributes like placeholder and type and name, all those kind of things? Like those are all HTML attributes that we would have to write out every like placeholder, name, type, size, color. We have to add all those things on there, and that's going to be kind of annoying. So it's actually a better solution to handle this particular problem, and I'll show it to you right now to make y'all better React developers. We're going to extend our current interface with another one. This will be like doing an ampersand with two different types. We're going to say it's going to extend a React HTML attributes type that's occurring on what? A div element. So we're going to say it's happening on an HTML div element. And that right there, as you can see, is how we can tell our container props that, hey, we're also going to have all the props that come with HTML div elements as HTML attributes according to what is coded in the React namespace, right? So React has this HTML attributes type that will add the appropriate attributes as props for a given type of element. I'm going to tell it it's my HTML div element. So now I have children and class name available here on the component itself, which I think I can now remove class name if I'm not mistaken, considering it should be recognized as a HTML attribute type, which it is. And now I have children and anything else I happen to pass in it. So we'll pass in an optional one called optional, which will be, let's say, a Boolean value we're going to be testing with here in just a moment, right? So here's how it's going to handle this problem here. As you can see, like, it's not mad about class name. You can see I removed class name for this container props interface, and it's being handled now by this React HTML attributes type, and it recognizes it's going to be a string value, and voila, TS is happy with me. There are no errors, and it recognizes this is the HTML attribute called ID and not some random prop of this component that happens to also share the name ID. This is, again, giving y'all one step further into being better React developers and React TypeScript developers especially. So I want to throw that into this video here because even though it had no output on the actual CSS of this component, it does give y'all some really cool knowledge on how to properly type, or more properly, because remember it's a spectrum, more properly type your components that end up being reusable pieces across your application like this. So I alluded to before my jump cut that we're going to customize the login component. And in the time it's already been like 40 minutes, but I can take a second to go ahead and do something kind of cool here. Let's make a new component called a loader card.tsx. This is one of my personal favorite ones as well. This is something I do on a lot of my projects because I think they are the cooler looking ones anyway. Yeah. We are going to make a quick component here that its sole purpose is going to be rendering what I call loader cards. Like, so, you know, in days past, you'd still see them. You will still see like spinners or progress bars for loading and things like that. But I think like the more modern equivalent I call the loader card. And we're going to see what I mean by this here in just a moment. We'll call this the loader card. There we go. How did I manage to mess up my own technique right there? There we go. And what it's going to do is I want it to return a div with some class names on it. We'll do flex I want to flex call these suckers so they go in a vertical fashion. We're going to center the items because the rules are reversed. So item center should be the horizontal now because we're doing flex column and not default flex row, which means justify center is now going to be handling the verticality and not the horizontal because, again, flex column flips those rules over. But again, justify center won't make a difference should the screen size not be accounted for, right? So vertical spacing, which is typically items and not justify, or align items, not justify items. Those vertical spacing rules in Flex won't matter if the size of the div doesn't have extra space to work with. So for now, we can kind of cheese it just by passing in like a min-h screen to say, hey, just always use the minimum size of the screen so we have some vertical space to actually justify our things in, which is normally align, but it's reversed in this case because we're doing a flex column, okay? So let's just say we're going to have a card. How am I going to do this? All right, let's say we have a div, and that class name, we're going to make it a full width div. We're going to have some margin bottom on it because when we have multiple cards stacking up, I don't want them sitting on each other. We want some shadow on our cards so we can see it. We're going to use the card class from Daisy, BG base 100, because I don't want it to be I want it to be a little bit offset from the background color. So that's what our card is going to look like. And inside of the card, we're going to have the classic card body class name from Daisy UI. And then we're going to have some progress bars. We're going to have a progress bar with a class name of width 2/3. Again, you could be in a class name of progress as well from Daisy UI, I'm pretty sure. This might just be... It's either Daisy or Tailwind, one of the two at this point. Right. I think we got to provide a value and max here in a second, because the max should be 100 and the value will be by the width of the progress bar, actually. So again, you can mess with these widths all you want here. I'm just copying what I've done on a previous project, and I liked it enough to try and include it here. And again, you'll see what these are here in just a moment, because this is what's going to appear while we're doing an API request, or maybe while we are checking the initial state of our application, while we check that token to see if somebody is logged in or not, like that we have seen in previous videos, where we had that authentication process of checking the token on first login to see what's going on, right? So maybe instead of showing a flicker of nothing, we'll show those loader cards temporarily while it does that. And again, I want multiple cards here to happen, but I want to see what this looks like here for now. So let's go ahead and just import this sucker. I'm going to add it to my list. And eventually I want to probably come in here and also start separating my exports to make in chunks, because I like doing that. Again, it's just a stylistic thing with comments for me. But yeah, anyway, let's render one of these suckers and see what it looks like. Because you'll like what I'm building here before I actually go into styling a form and things like that. Let's just render it outside of the container somewhere. I don't really care. I just want to see what it looks like. Stop it. I want to just see what it looks like. Loader card. And come on now. See, so there is what I mean by a loader card, right? It is a card that has some incremental progress bars on it, so it looks like it's almost content, like a placeholder card of content. We'll probably also want to add some padding as well to this sucker here, and maybe not on large screen sizes. So in loader card over yonder, I might do px2, and then anything larger than that, maybe I don't want anything. So there we go. Cool. So, loader card full width right there is fine. Loader card on a device should not be at the edges of the screen. So the padding x2 added a little bit of padding right there off the side of the screen. Whereas I don't really care on larger screen sizes because it's going to be containerized anyway. Yeah, so that's what a loader card is. And if I want multiple of those, I could just copy and paste this card right here, which could theoretically work, but there's actually a cooler way we could do this. What if I pass my loader card a prop called size, right? that will be how many, or length or something like that, which will make it tell my loader card component how many cards to display. So I could have the following. Man, my fingers are off home base there. It'll be a number prop that is optional, because maybe we'll have it default to 1 or something like that. So I will say, give me length as a prop right there. Okay. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create an empty array of size length. This will make an empty array of size length. If you want to see what this code here does, let's go to the browser and check it out rather than doing a quick console log, or we are doing a console log. You can see it's allocated an array of 5 empty indexes, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to fill this thing in by doing the following code. We're going to do a .fill with empty strings like that. That's what that code gets us right there, an array of 5 empty strings. And then I'll be simply mapping over it. I don't care what each element is, but I do care what its index is. And then from there, we're going to be returning some JSX out of it, right? So basically, instead of returning the index here just so I can display something, but this is what we're doing. We're creating an array of a dynamic length, filling it with some crap, and then mapping over it so we can display multiple cards based on a prop we pass in called props.length. So like I said, .fill this sucker in, map over it. Because we're cool, implicit multi-line return. We do not care about what the actual element is since they're all blank strings, but I do care about the index position of each of these things because I'll be rendering these divs, each loader card, depending on how many I want to display. Okay? So why do we need the index there as well? Because we're mapping through an array of stuff. We got to have a good key name here. So I'll say this is loader card dash index and interpolate it in for my key right there. So typically indexes are not a great choice when using an array map because they could be variable in size, but these aren't going to be rendered in multiple locations across my app. We'll probably only see it on the initial load and maybe 1 or 2 other places. But yeah, that's it. I thought that was just a pretty cool way of building a set of loader cards that could have a variable length here. So I could say, give us a length of 3. So we can have 3 loader cards now appearing. Let's see what that does for us. Yeah, and there you go. We now have 3 loader cards appearing, which I think is pretty cool. So do you want, I mean, again, there's going to be a flicker when these things appear, and I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a moment. Let's go over to our auth provider components, because this is where I put in that returning h1 loading thing. Let's return a set of loader cards instead. So let's going to go ahead and come up yonder and import that in. Import loader. Actually, it's in the same directory here, so I can just say import loader card from loader card and come down yonder. Instead of returning this h1, we can now return our lovely loader card component of length of 3 like that. That way we have our loader cards returning as long as the auth state is checking. So we know that the auth state will validate our token to confirm we're logged in. Let's force the loader cards to appear before some code is ran for, let's say, 2 entire seconds. We're going to have that code delayed there. So refresh, check it out. 1,000, 2, 1,000. Oh, the cards are still there. But yeah, like those loader cards now are going to act. They're going to act as our loading screen while we check the status of the auth token, and voila, it will then remove them off. And again, this is something you see across a lot of apps on the web these days, these kind of placeholder cards. I call them loader cards, placeholder cards, that are kind of like the better and more modern equivalent of the progress or spinning wheel. They just look like some content that's about to load in anyway, and you'll see that a lot on Discord. I mean, I don't know if I can force it here, but there's a tournament website I use to look at Smash tournaments. Oh, there they were. You saw that? I think we can actually force them to appear again. Hold on. Yeah, as you can see, like those placeholder values are just the way it goes in the modern era. Where was the option to ruin my own network performance here? I know there's a way to do this to simulate a super slow. Yeah, so we could have we could actually see what our app might look like by going to and throttling what our how fast or slow our device might be when it comes to loading things. So it's currently simulating a super much slower mobile thing, and you can see how your website loads. And I was hoping that it would actually show us more of those loader cards here. But yeah, you can see with the slower load times, you can see those kind of placeholders filling in over time, right? So one time I did this to show a student how it looks, and I forgot to reset my throttling back to say no throttling, and I was wondering why all my websites and applications were loading so insanely slow. It's because I forgot to turn off my throttling after showing students that it could be done. But yeah, that's what loader cards are. I want to show you all that here, and there's one more tidbit I want to show y'all. Let's go remove the set time out, because that was just put there to force it to slow down and let us see what happens. Now here's another thing you might take into consideration. That flicker almost looks worse with the loader cards flicking in for a nanosecond before the state is correctly set. So we have some choices around that here. Let's go to the loader card and say, hey, don't show the loader cards until maybe half a second has passed by, then display them. This will actually feel a lot more natural than having them simply instantaneously flicker on the screen then disappear, right? So that's something you can take that you should take into consideration. Like, do I want the cards to flicker really fast as it checks the token, or do I want to leave it blank for half a second, then show the cards like something's working, and then when this request finishes, whether good or bad, then the cards disappear and the rest of the app ends up rendering, right? So again, it all boils down to what is the user experience you're really looking for while this promise finishes doing its job. So we can say that maybe I want to return a blank div temporarily, if some variable or state called blank loader is true, then we're going to return an empty div temporarily, and then when blank loader is off, we return the loader cards. But the problem is we have to set a timer for this to happen. So let me show you what will go on now. It's an hour-long video, Luke. My God, man. Right, so we're going to have blank rotor, blank loader, set blank loader. It's a call to use state. It can infer the Boolean type for now. I don't really care. But we're going to go ahead and write it out. Okay, now I want to say that it's starting off as true. So once again, I should probably go back and add that set timeout so we could visualize this again. There we go. As you can see, it'll be the blank thing temporarily. And we want to say, hey, do I want to load the loader cards in instantly or after some time has passed? What we're going to say is, hey, after the initial render occurs, I would like to run a singular time some code. This code is going to set a timer, right? That will call set blank loader false after half a second has passed. That way it triggers from the blank div over to the loader cards for some user experience. Now, the timer is a browser web-based API, set timeout. This has nothing to do with the React tree, which remember React is just a giant mess of objects that are translated to DOM elements. The timeout runs in the browser side DOM that should trigger this React state change. But if this component has been unloaded, right? If this component is unrendered and this component renders the rest of the app and this component finishes its timer and says, hey, I'm going to call my state to update. Hey, I don't exist anymore. I can't call state because I no longer exist. Let me show y'all what I mean by that. I wonder if we can actually simulate this correctly here. So it should load up the blank div. After half a second, the cards appear. And there you go, right? They disappear because the thing had been set. Now, what if I change this to 3000, right? So what if the request finishes before the timer fires? Because before, this was set to 500, which is half a second, but the auth provider was set to 2 seconds. So let's change it up. What if that auth provider finishes before this timer fires to tell the cards to display? So now it'll be the blank div, 3 seconds for the card to appear, 2 seconds for request to finish. Oops. You might call, I was hoping the error would pop up here. I'm surprised it's not. What's actually happening in the background is this set timeout, set blank loader false is firing, but it's going to be firing a state update. This might only be because I wrote my own React script here, but I don't think I have like any kind of linter. I don't have a linter or rules or things like that. But if you were in Create React App, you will generally see an error saying, hey, you just tried to update state on an unmounted component. That is bad practice. Meaning, loader card is no longer even in the picture anymore because this if statement's done. And it's now returning my entire application. And all of a sudden, loader card, who no longer exists in the browser, in the DOM or the React tree, is like, hey, time to set load. Hey, I can't set blank loader to false because the loader card component is unmounted. It's gone, right? Its job is done. So we need to actually return a cleanup inside of this component. This return cleanup function will only run when the component unmounts, aka when this auth provider toggles from this to this. This will unmount the loader card component, which will trigger this return cleanup function to run, and we needed to ask it to stop its timer from continuing to run because, well, it's unmounted and the request finished before the half-second process has occurred. That is a really good little trick I wanted to show y'all when it comes to UX and how to handle that from a React perspective, right? So this will return a blank div for half a second. It will render the blank div. That's the first initial render because the initialized value of the state is true. And then they'll fire the effect after the initial render. It'll start that timer for half a second. After half a second is over, the state of the component changes, which triggers the re-render to be the loader cards. And yeah, that's what it does. Let's say, as an example, once again, initial render loads a blank screen. It sets the timer for half a second. Oh, before half a second is up, so let's say a quarter of a second, auth provider toggles from checking to no longer checking. It will then tell this component, hey, as you're about to unmount, clear that timer you just set because you don't need to be running anymore. So that's what its purpose is. There you all go. I thought that was some really cool stuff to show along the way as we begin to style the app here. I swear we'll get to it eventually. But I'm trying to make more lessons. I've said this like 4 times now. I'm trying to convert just random styling into more cool lessons by showing y'all some really interesting things you could do with component rendering, with props, with cleanup effects, and all those kind of fun things. So ta-ta for now. I'll see you in the next video where I'll probably do some more styling and some more lessons if I can shoehorn them in along the way.